Welcome everyone. Thank you for tuning in to today's news report on the war in Ukraine for day 337, brought to you by The Account. Russia once again launched a massive missile attack on Ukraine. We will take a look at the events and latest updates in detail. Otherwise, I only have some minor news today, so, as usual, they are grouped into the situation inside Ukraine, containing an interview by retired General Mark Hertling, the occupied territories, Russia and Belarus, including an assessment by John Kirby, and international developments, with additional updates on the tank situation. But before we start, the flashpoints along the front. Bakhmut. The situation is stable once again. While fighting around Bakhmut continues, the intensity has reduced. The Institute for the Study of War noted that as well today. Small-scale battles took place around Klishchiivka in the south, in the eastern outskirts of Bakhmut, and around Blahoddatne. During an interview, President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that during the assault on Bakhmut in Donetsk region, the Russian occupiers lost thousands of people and did not count those killed during the attacks. Vuhledar. Ukraine continues to repel attacks around Vuhledar. No evidence that Russia has entered the city yet. Fighting is concentrated in the area southeast of Vuhledar and northwest of Mykhilske. Russian forces are reportedly also attacking from the Pavlivka direction. So far, Russia has failed to gain a foothold near Vuhledar or take the supply lines under fire control. Russia is, according to photographic and video evidence, suffering massive casualties. And to start the news segment, an update on today's missile attack by Russia. Once again, Russia launched a massive missile attack on Ukraine. This article in Ukrainian by Liga.net has a timeline of the events. During the night, Russia launched 24 Shahed drones at Ukraine. All of them were intercepted. Then, around 8 a.m. in the morning, it started. Russian missiles were inbound. Air raid sirens started sounding throughout Ukraine and lasted for over 4 hours before they finally turned off at 12:15 p.m. The Ukrainian command reported 47 out of 55 missiles were intercepted. In Kyiv, all 20 missiles were said to be destroyed, however, damage throughout Kyiv was reported, most likely from falling debris. 3 missiles were shot down over Odessa. Authorities reported several missile hits in Odessa and Vinnytsia Oblast. In Odessa Oblast, 2 energy infrastructure facilities were hit, while in Kyiv Oblast, 1 energy infrastructure facility was hit. As a result, emergency power cuts were introduced in Kyiv and several other oblasts. Overall, 11 civilians were killed and another 11 were injured by the attack, the State Emergency Service reports. President Zelensky called a staff meeting to discuss ways to further improve the air defenses of the country. And now for all the minor news out of Ukraine. The President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, when asked if a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin could help resolve the war, stated that after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Putin is a nobody to him. Viktor Medvedchuk is planning to create a political party to rally opponents of President Zelensky. As a reminder, the godfather of the daughter of Medvedchuk is Putin himself, and in September 2022, Russia exchanged him for 200 Ukrainian prisoners of war. During an interview, retired US General Mark Hertling stated that he is convinced that Ukraine can win the war and return all territories occupied by Russia, including Crimea. According to Vadim Skibitsky, representative of the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine, his country urgently needs long-range missiles. Russia is learning from mistakes, and logistics hubs are now located at a distance of 80 to 120 kilometers from the front line, putting them just out of range of systems like HIMARS. The Security Service of Ukraine arrested a lieutenant colonel in its ranks on suspicion of treason. The officer, who was stationed in Zaporizhzhia, is accused of conducting intelligence work for the Russian occupiers. The Azov Special Operation Forces Regiment became the 3rd separate assault brigade in the ground forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov published a photo of himself in a Ukrainian-made Bohdan self-propelled artillery system and announced that the tanks handed over by the West will be supported by Ukrainian artillery at the front. In 2022, the Ministry of Defense organized the financing for the production of these artillery systems. Now let's take a look at the situation in the occupied territories. According to the National Resistance Center, Russian authorities have deported all residents of Nechaieve village near Oleshki, Kherson Oblast. The houses are now being used as residences for Russian soldiers. Russia has begun to reinforce its troops in the Zaporizhzhia region. While currently there is no large-scale offensive action in the area, the increase in personnel could enable Russian units to go on the offensive. Deputy Minister of Defense Hanna Malya, referring to Ukrainian intelligence data, has claimed that Russia is using 5 mobile crematoria along the front to hide large losses. Moving on to the latest updates from Russia and Belarus. Yevgeny Prigozhin, head of the Wagner PMC, has offered Igor Girkin, former defense minister of the DPR, a senior position in one of the Wagner PMC assault units in Ukraine, despite an extremely negative attitude by commanders towards Girkin. Prigozhin argues this would be a perfect situation to check whether Girkin's stated combat experience and usefulness are true. However, Girkin would not be offered a high leadership position, as for this to happen it is necessary to show your capabilities. It's time to move from words to deeds, Prigozhin said. According to the National Security Council Coordinator for Strategic Communications, John Kirby, US intelligence does not see any signs of a possible use of nuclear weapons by Russia. He also noted that while Russia's military strength has weakened significantly over the 11 months of war, support for Ukraine should not weaken, as Russia still remains a threat. And to wrap up the news segment, the international developments. The US Treasury Department has designated the infamous Kremlin-backed Wagner PMC as a significant transnational criminal organization and imposed sanctions on its support network worldwide. Most Germans approve of Chancellor Olaf Scholz's decision to supply Leopard 2 tanks to the armed forces of Ukraine. 53% say the decision is correct. 39% are against the supply of tanks to Ukraine. The majority of the against camp are voters of the far-right and pro-Kremlin Alternative for Germany party. Boris Pistorius, Federal Minister of Defense of Germany, has promised to supply Ukraine with German Leopard 2 tanks by the end of March. Challenger 2 tanks are expected to arrive in Ukraine at the end of March as well, according to Alex Chalk, a top official at the UK Defence Department. As announced by Bjørn Arild Gram, Norway's defense minister, Ukrainian soldiers will receive sharpshooting, command control and medical training in Norway. According to the Minister of National Defense Anita Anand, Canada will send 4 of the 112 Leopard 2 main battle tanks of the Canadian Armed Forces to Ukraine. The United States intends to transfer the more advanced Abrams M1A2 tank and not the older Abrams A1. However, they will be stripped of their so-called secret armor, which includes depleted uranium. And now for the intelligence report segment, starting with the UK Ministry of Defence. Russia has likely completed training of the 2nd Guards Motor Rifle Division, GMRD, in Belarus, which had been carrying out training since autumn 2022. The majority of the 2nd GMRD has now transferred back to Russia before almost certainly being recommitted to operations in Ukraine. The 2nd GMRD is an element of the 1st Guards Tank Army and suffered major losses in the opening phases of the conflict. It is now primarily made up of mobilized personnel operating older equipment taken from storage. Its combat effectiveness will likely be limited despite several weeks of training. There is a realistic possibility that other Russian units are being rotated into Belarus for similar training, and that Russia will continue this model to regenerate and prepare units to maintain its force in Ukraine. A look at the latest assessment by the Institute for the Study of War. The researchers are seeing several signs for preparation for a major offensive campaign by Russia in the Luhansk Oblast. They argue that the Russian accumulation of troops along the Luhansk front and many small-scale offensive actions along other parts of the front point to that. These small-scale battles are designed to distract Ukrainian reinforcements and force them to be deployed elsewhere. The Institute also mentions that these small-scale attacks are notably ongoing as the pace of Russian operation around Bakhmut, led by the Wagner PMC, seems to be declining. After the capture of Soledar, the attacks on Bakhmut and surrounding settlements have dropped off significantly, suggesting that the Russian offensive around Bakhmut may be culminating and that the military leadership has deprioritized the capture of Bakhmut. And to wrap up the report, the evening update by the General Staff of Ukraine. The enemy does not abandon its intention to destroy the critical infrastructure of our state and strike at civilian objects and homes of the civilian population. The threat of air and missile strikes throughout the territory of Ukraine remains. During the day, the enemy carried out 37 airstrikes, 17 of them using Shahed 136 UAVs. All drones were shot down. In addition, the Russian invaders launched 59 missiles, 47 of which were destroyed. Unfortunately, there are hits on civilian objects and there are casualties among civilians. In addition, the invaders launched 53 attacks using MLRS. In order to achieve the previously stated goals, despite significant losses, the enemy continues its offensive in the Bakhmut and Novopavlivka directions. On the Liman and Avdiivka directions, the enemy conducted unsuccessful actions with the aim of improving the tactical position. In the rest of the directions, the enemy is defending. Counterintelligence measures are ongoing in some temporarily occupied settlements of the Kherson region. Russian occupiers are actively looking for Ukrainian partisans. In the building of the former Gorno-Staivsky Regional Department of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine in the Kherson region, the Russian invaders set up a torture chamber. One can be put in it simply because of an unsubstantiated suspicion of cooperation with the armed forces of Ukraine. In the temporarily occupied Ukrainian Simferopol, all budget institutions, under the pretext of reform, received an instruction to reduce staff by 10%. It is also known that lists of persons subject to optimization must be drawn up by February 1st of this year. And that concludes today's news report. If you're interested in any of the articles I mentioned and want to read it up in detail, links can be found in the description as usual. Thank you for tuning in and have a great day. You were listening to The Account. Slava Ukraini.